Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Rethinking Balance Sheets. And it's another exciting episode here on a Friday morning. Just to kick us off, it's welcome to Nicole.
Woi, bro.
Apa dia?
Aku message kau 50 kali, tak balas.
Alah bro, aku
Bro,
tak
ni?
ada time lah bro message. Aku sekarang tengah Nicole bro. Nicole lah itu dia in sekarang. Tengah trending tengah kacau.
Kau cakap apa? Apa tu?
Nicole, kau tak
Nicole?
tahu Nicole? Google kau tahu?
Ha?
Nicole kau tak tahu? Tak, Nicole app untuk belajar bro. Semua tengah belajar guna
Oh,
Nicole sekarang. CEO
ilmu.
semua tengah guna Nicole.
Share sikit lah.
Boleh bro, kau tengok macam ni bro.
Okey.
Kau kalau kau lembab, kau kena Nicole bro.
Memang aku lembab sikit sebenarnya.
Bro, kalau kau nak laju, kau nak top, kau nak jadi CEO, kau kena guna Nicole. Kau tahu kena pergi mana? Digital.renomics.org. 200 je bro tahun.
Aku buat tu aku tak lembab dah.
Tak tahu bro capacity kau macam mana.
Oh,
Tapi aku
macam tu.
rasa Nicole ni boleh tolong kau lah bro. Confirm.
Okey. Berapa?
RM200 je bro tahun.
Boleh lah duit raya pakai ya.
Selamba bro. Ni kau tengok ni bro. Percaya bro, kau tengok ni. Ini daripada Howard bro. Power bro.
Woi, memang cantik.
Apa ni? Jangan ambil aku nya.
Okey.
Aduh.
Sorry. Aku teruja sangat lah.
Ni tak apa kita tunggu sini.
Welcome, everyone, to Rethinking Balance Sheets. And as ever, Ravindran Navaratnam will always join me here as we talk about some very interesting different things on the balance sheet, and we look at different aspects of it. Ravi, welcome to the show. Always glad to have you here, my co-conspirator and co-champion. So Ravi, tell us a bit about what we're going to talk about today. And we've had, it's our 12th episode, if I'm not mistaken, right? 12 weeks
I
of
think
a
it's
run.
lucky 13 actually today.
Oh, it's like a 13. Wow, you're 13. There you go. Ravi's
Okay.
keeping count, obviously. So
Okay,
where's episode 13 taking us today?
Okay, I like that word co-conspirator, but I think it's a dangerous word. Rethinking balance sheets, co-conspirators sounds like fraud. Probably get thousands of viewers, but never mind. But unfortunately, we are on the honest side of rethinking balance sheets. This show is all about the honest side. And one of the things that we talked about was how to reorganize the balance sheet when it's in distress. And as you know, this series today is slightly off the previous part. We had a series of 5 that Sage 3 took upon itself to actually build up on starting from, when you're in trouble, what do you do? And I think, you read the financial press, there's certainly the very large restructuring going on, the airlines, some of the large oil and gas companies, a little bit in the construction sector, certainly the hotel sector and leisure sector, there's been a lot of it. So again, how do you actually think about it? I know a lot of SMEs would probably think maybe not everything is relevant, but I still say look at it because it's just that when we talk about the large corporates, we're talking about more things, but there are subsegments of this that also relate to the SMEs. We'll try to keep it as simple as possible. I know it is a difficult topic, so we'll try to keep it as simple as possible. But just to summarize, we started just from the very important thing, and that doesn't matter if you're an SME or a large company, getting your mindset correct. What do I need to do to get it? Then we went into the various legal processes with some of the best lawyers in the insolvency space to talk about the various process. And I think we also talk about the voluntary process through CDRC and SDRS. That's been also well covered. Then we went into let's see how we originate this deal. How do we make a proposal to the creditors and actually look at our business plans, really re-examine ourselves, part of the origination phase of things. And then last week, we covered one of the exciting parts, which is the negotiation, when the adrenaline gets all pumped up. And we think we've got everything done. We are in the home stretch on the execution phase. But it's not totally been a home stretch as we had. And we got 2 excellent gentlemen to join us today. One from Sage 3 who suffers on the execution phase and, as making sure all those documents are done properly. And of course, one of the leading law firms in insolvency and restructuring, Lim Chee Partners, Mr. Shih, one of the partners there, who handles a lot of the cases. Yeah.
And so we're going to zoom into this final restructuring, or the execution phase, of the final stage.
Yeah.
And we've got two fantastic guests who'll be joining us. So shall we bring them up and get them
Yes,
up
we
and running?
should.
All right.
Not
So,
only are they very smart, they're also very good-looking gentlemen.
oh, they are as good looking as us, old farts.
That's what I thought. That was the attraction of the show, actually.
Shaun and Lishi, welcome to the show.
Morning.
Always glad to have you with us.
Morning.
And we are in this final stretch, right? So we talked about the different aspects of how to transform or how to turn around or restructure your organization, especially in a time of a crisis. And as we zoom into this final phase, we talked about the negotiation phase with Dr. Derek last week. How to really get to that point where you can get this done, or we can agree on getting it done. And then comes obviously the phase where we call the execution phase. So tell us what exactly happens at this execution phase. What does that mean, and tell us about that phase a little bit.
You don't mind if I take this one?
Yep. Yes. Go.
Thank you. Yeah. Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks again. Grateful for the opportunity to run with the big boys. So in the execution phase, that usually starts with the appointment of the creditors' legal counsel, and that's usually done with the consensus of the creditors, of course. And they are there to look out for the interests of the creditors as these documents are getting drafted. Of course, then you get to the suffering, the actual drafting of the documents, right? And our role as advisors, we want to make sure that whatever was discussed, whatever was negotiated in the last phase is captured accurately in these documents, right? The spirit and the intent of the negotiations, we want to capture that. We definitely don't want a situation where we find out at the end of it, a creditor is missing a piece of land or a piece of asset, which has happened. Not one of our cases, but we have seen that happen. Don't know how that happened, but we also don't want a situation where the clauses or the provisions in these documents are drafted too ambiguous. We want to make sure that the borrower's duties and obligations to the creditors are clearly spelled out. Because again, we have seen cases where poorly drafted documents admitted by the creditors themselves lead to very huge contention on what kind of liabilities are actually owed. So we want to make sure that all these things are in place, before proceeding. Once you get the documentation done, you go forward with fulfilling your condition precedents, and the day that everybody looks forward to, the settlement date. But I think if you are restructuring through Section 366, there's a couple of additional steps. Lishi, maybe you want to take that one. What happens, from the CCM onwards from there?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Shaun and Roshan and Ravi, of course, for having me on the show. Of course, I think what Shaun accurately set out is where hopefully it is out of court process. It's on strong corporate documentation, strong banking documentation. It resolves all of your borrower obligations. It's very clearly set out in good documentation. But sometimes there's the necessity to actually embark on a court-driven process. So Shaun referred to it as a Section 366. Let's just call it also, that's a particular provision. It's a scheme of arrangement. It's a scheme of arrangement that allows us to get a court order through 3 phases. Let's get a court order so that I have permission from the court to hold a creditors meeting. Because at the second stage, at the creditors meeting, I'm looking for a 75% in value for all of them to agree. The 75% in value, of course, is, and it may have been covered in the earlier show, that's a very useful, magical mark to meet so that I don't have to achieve that almost sometimes impossible task of getting every single one of my creditors to sign up based on either documentation, formal or informal. So I clear the second phase, hopefully. And eventually I get the court order for sanction. So it's the court, not rubber stamping, but the court will sanction the scheme, the proposal. And I guess we'll cover some of the challenges or trends that we see, maybe across these trends as well. But hopefully you don't need the likes of a lawyer like me to go for a court order. But quite often there needs to be a bit of strategic input, I guess, to decide, do I need to go down this path?
Thank you so much for that brief summary, guys. But I think Shaun, you mentioned the suffering, and I think the next thing that we were going to ask you was maybe you share with us why we're seeing sometimes the documentation taking longer than the origination and the negotiation phase going
Yeah.
on for 12 months. I accept
Yeah.
the negotiation phase, we haven't pinned down everything. There is still a little bit of ambiguity, but we're seeing more than 12 months. I've even heard of a case running for 24 months.
Yeah. I think that's the pain gets prolonged to a significant degree, right? Yes. Go
Well,
ahead.
yes. A short answer, yes. But I mean, I think in those cases where it does drag on, I mean, the documentation drags on for like 12, 24 months. I think in context, you're usually looking at or thinking about larger, more complex restructurings, which involve multiple stakeholders with very disparate needs. For example, perhaps you need to deal with an essential creditor who may be a utility company, which has different kind of needs that you need to attend to. Of course, you got the various banks. If a borrower has like 14 banks, that's like almost including their officers, their lawyers, their committees are involved. You got anywhere between 100 to 200 people looking at your proposal. So that's a lot of opinions and considerations that you need to take into account of. And then definitely can prolong the documentation process. I think also very simply is just that, ideally, I would love it if everyone could come back to me as per the timeline in my email. But, that doesn't really happen because every bank has their own timings and different schedules for their committee meetings and when they get approvals and run past all these proposals. Everyone's working on sort of a different timeline. So, of course, the more stakeholders you have involved in the process, the more views, and it just prolongs the process, and people just waiting for people to get back to you. Yeah,
I think, guys, what's happening is also with COVID. Sometimes, whilst we say that Zoom meetings and everything can sort things out, but nothing like in a room. You put everybody in a room, gets that mind focused and sorting out things. We can't do that. Previously, pre-COVID, obviously, you had rooms with 15, 20 people sitting down with documents and finishing it off. But the case of the 24 months was pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID, right? Yeah.
I still have to qualify that. Pre-COVID. But I think what's happening is, of course, with COVID and the shift towards using technology, we're seeing, even for the documentation phase, WhatsApp groups being created just for the documentation phase. And that's helped. It's helped. So people are looking for innovative ways on how to get this huge documentation sorted out as soon as possible. Yeah.
But I think on the downside, I mean, when documentation takes so long, right, it opens up the door for renegotiations and, potentially that happening, right? And I mean, I'm sure you've seen cases where you started when going to the documentation phase and then it opens up again and can of worm opens up and boom, you're back to the negotiation table and it's start. How do you actually prevent that from happening, from renegotiations or negotiations to reopen? How's that work? Lisha, you want to take this? Oh, sorry.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thanks, Roshan.
I mean, I'll just chip in very briefly, but
Sure.
yeah, either Ravi and Shaun can then add on as well. I think it's also going to be a lot driven by setting out the clarity during, and I think it was that very important negotiations phase. I think we covered last week episode, that whether it's already a binding term sheet, whether it's trashing out all of the issues. And I think I completely hear what Ravi was mentioning, that really this transition from face-to-face meet, war room-like setting, all of us thrashing all the issues out together, as opposed to faceless, and oftentimes it's a faceless Teams meeting or a faceless Zoom meeting, right? We sometimes even the cameras are not even turned off. We actually lose that bit of element. But again, if during the negotiations there's a very clear clarity and that process has driven it, hopefully there is very little then room for, oh wait, we suddenly missed this out. Oh, suddenly we want to renegotiate certain commercial term. So I think it's getting really that negotiations phase hopefully executed tight.
Yeah, I just think that if you have a good plan in place that is grounded in facts and accepted restructuring principles, there's very little room to renegotiate from there, because if the borrower can't pay $100, he can't pay $100, right? And if the asset values are only going to be realized at a certain level, that's you can't really push it from there. So again, being able to have your proposal grounded in facts and restructuring principles really goes a long way. And having clear guidelines of how to manage these situations, in which case, CDRC provides an excellent forum for such code of conducts, what to do in such situations. So, clear processes that everyone's familiar with really goes a long way with helping
maybe
preventing
Roshan,
negotiation reopening.
today I can chip in, and I'm glad I'm not in the same room with Shih, because what I'm about to say is controversial. Once you got a bunch of lawyers with egos there, the negotiation restarts. Just let me put it there.
Sadly, I have to agree, Ravi, to some extent. Yeah, I've been
lucky you got through your coffee
yeah.
at me.
I usually find that the negotiations it's not really so much on the terms, but it's really on how it's drafted.
Okay,
and that can actually take a long time, figuring out where the semicolon goes. It doesn't make sense to,
Okay,
merge
and
those.
that's where
But we
the
appreciate
first
it.
episode comes back into
Yeah.
all these things. Leadership. Somebody's got to be leading this. If there's no leadership, I think that's really the long and the short of the 24 months and the 12 months and everything about that. There needs to be a principal there with a cane and making it happen. And not letting these egos run wild.
So we've, let me just jump into some of our viewers out there. Ida's dialing in from Seremban. Good morning to everyone and giving you guys the thumbs up. Anil's dialed in. Good morning, gents. And a question from Sashi. Never seen Ravi so techie before. I don't know what that means, but would you say that the pandemic has made this final restructuring phase more complicated? I think you have. If so, is there some virtual best practices during this phase? Anyone want to take that?
Well, what I've seen that's worked is try to use the Zoom meetings. Try to do stuffs with. I'm not selling Microsoft Teams here. I don't get any commission from Microsoft Teams here. But sometimes the documentation, if it can be done with everybody working on it together, stuff that you couldn't really do even previously when you went in a war room, is there. It can be used. I also can say, which is the real problem of work from home, it seems like work never ends. I've seen that happen within the documentation phase. I think, again, it's on the techie side. Just to remind Shashi, I used to be CIO of Busa. I do have an engineering degree, but I've long forgotten that. But coming back to this thing, I think we've seen, but all the usual stuff about, project management still comes in. What are the issues? You're clearing them one by one. Somebody's keeping a schedule of where we are, how many have been cleared, how many are critical, how many are deal breakers, how many I can give, right? And that, coming back to consensus, and compromise. Restructuring is about compromise. If you forget that at the execution phase, you're going to have the same problem you had at the negotiation phase,
Sure. Please do.
Please do.
Especially where we are late on in the execution phase, oftentimes it may be some sort of court-driven process. Ultimately, there's going to be some sort of meeting with creditors. And in the past, whether we're talking about a small pool of financial institutions or a large group of trade creditors, one thing with how we've transformed over the one last year with the ease of doing Zoom meetings, team meetings, and other sort of virtual meeting platform, it really encourages, for better or for worse, heavier creditor engagement. Because you're not good, because in the past, if they were a foreign creditor, how are they going to travel all the way to Malaysia to attend a creditors meeting? But now everyone is going to be dialing in, they're testing, they're asking questions. And again, but then it comes with the good and the bad. There may be limitations on the platform, whether that you lose that in-person asking and questioning the chair of the meeting. It just becomes a text that can be controlled or filtered through depending on the platform. So you're getting the good and the bad. You have heavier engagement, you have lower engagement. But it's a balance. But technology really has changed how you run even that aspect of meetings.
Absolutely. And just for those of you who missed the first 3 or 4 episodes, in terms of mindset, there's a summary that you can get. Just click on the link, and you should be able to get the summary. That's the mindset episode, and then the restructuring one. How do you actually put together a rescue plan? That's there. Quick question, and then maybe Ravi can ask another question. But Chui Mei asked a question: what are the key pitfalls in this stage? You guys want to take that?
Yeah, I think the first one is the opening up of the negotiations. Yeah,
The reopening of the
reopening of the negotiations.
That's dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah, that one is really can derail the whole thing. But some of it has been extremely technical. I think we try to keep this promise of not going too detailed. But one of the cases we did was the guarantor was a gentleman in a rather elderly gentleman, and the whole issue about the estate in the event of his passing, and the restructuring took a long period of time to complete. So how does the estate get involved, and all the rules about estate came in. Nobody had actually figured that out during the negotiation phase. So when it came to putting pen to into the contract, it came very, very tricky. So that one was one of the instances where really it had to be renegotiated on how we actually dealt with that technical issue of in the passing of the guarantor, how the estate would participate, and what are the detailed terms to deal with that. So that's one. The other is, I think, the pitfalls at this stage is very simple. If it's, I alluded to it in the beginning, that wonderful feeling of the home stretch. It ain't the home stretch yet. I think that was that's probably where everybody's elated. Yeah, we are in the home stretch. It isn't. You can't drop the ball at this stage. It just needs that same determination. We talked about the mindset. It's that 18 months. It wasn't, we never said it was 9 to 12 months up to the negotiation phase. We said it's 18 to 24 months up to the execution stage. That mindset cannot change. So if you change your mindset, we are all there, let's take it easy. That's what I've seen. Definitely, I've seen happen.
Restructurings are definitely marathons. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, any other pitfalls that you guys see, Shaun and Lee?
I was just gonna say, actually taking your eye off the ball, but Ravi mentioned it. Really, it's like a marathon. You have to keep going, and it's just the good thing is that it's just one more hump, and then you're home. So that's definitely it. Yeah.
I will say one thing, because once the creditors are signed off at committee level, there is an insistence of getting through to the end. Everybody still has that great desire to get to the end, but maybe just that people are tired, it's long, etc. Maybe lethargy gets in, and if the negotiation gets very long, then of course that's why it's really good if you can, like all complex projects, if you can have a fixed timeline to finish it, and people don't go beyond that timeline, is still an important aspect. It's no different from a major IT project which I used to work on. It's used to keep that time frame 3 months and say, look, okay, at the end of the 3 months, really what's absolutely necessary and what we can live without, the nice to haves. No different, again, like going back to the IT example, the nice to haves, the bells and whistles, versus what's absolutely required in the agreement to be covered.
Great. Shall we, if there's no more input, Ravi, you had a couple of questions you wanted to ask?
Okay, I think the first one really is on debtor in possession, in terms of what do you think as an approach as debtor in possession, and how important is this execution stage for the debtor in possession part, and again how does that all come together? Maybe Shaun and Lee can actually put this forward.
Yeah, I'll jump in, Shaun, and you can just add on.
Sure.
I mean, putting it again in simple layman's terms, it's essentially a mode of restructuring, or a principle that allow management to be in control. If the management is in control, the businessmen are still in control. They understand the business, they know the customers, they have the faith, or they still have the confidence of major creditors. They should be the ones leading. Of course, the restructuring. They're still in control of the management, but of course they need help. They need help with advisors such as Shih. They're going to need help from legal counsel. But in essence, don't dislodge management. And there are a lot of practical advantages that would then flow from that. For example, if they understand the business, they are able to now try to secure new contracts. Are they able to secure white knight investor? Is the owner, founder prepared to inject in, pump in more capital? So that's, in essence, advantages and the thought process behind a debtor in possession driven restructuring. And again, if we transport that simple term of look, allow the management to remain in control. They just need a shot in the arm. They need advisors. They may need court assistance. We see that then start to pollinate all across globally. Chapter 11 in US is a debtor in possession driven restructuring. With again, you have these other components. Do you assist with rescue financing? Do you have a bit of court driven process? Do you have the advisors? In Malaysian terms, it's a scheme of arrangement. The scheme of arrangement, yet again, is look, management drives it, but you do need different players and other stakeholders to play their parts. The court is going to come and assist in different ways. But in essence, that's the nub of a debtor in possession driven restructuring with the advantages that will follow.
Maybe, Lishi, here's a great point to ask you some of the, I think one of the parts of the execution phase is at court sanction. Maybe just explain what that process a little bit. I know it's in episode 2, it was covered. But what's interesting that you've seen in terms of the some of the cases where you've gone to court in terms of sanction?
Okay. So this is where the end of the journey is going to be, hopefully through a scheme of arrangement, court-driven process to get the sanction stage. But I think for us to understand how is it that we get to the end of that journey, I have to briefly explain why it's so important that during that journey we get certain things right. Because if we're not going to get certain things right, that's where all of the various sanction issues or objections and the various other challenges I've seen at the court sanction. So I guess I have to repeat again that it's briefly, if you were to see it on an episode by episode basis, or we're going at different landmarks across the journey, we get things right, hopefully with documentation largely wrapped up, approval in principle is there. We know that we need to just launch a scheme arrangement because it's impossible right now to get everybody to sign up. But if we're able to get 75% in value, well, this is a kind of a good journey to get to sanction. So you need to engage a restructuring insolvency lawyer, whether it's me or someone in the same field, to get court permission, stage 1. We call that the convening stage, or look, you're going to get a bit of a court order to start the process. We then, as we start to move over into stage 2 as the creditors meeting, these are where some of the pitfalls I've started to see, where it's all going to possibly blow up at your last stage, being you go back to court sanction. And I think I would say that there are 2 themes. I will again strip away all the legal technicalities, but I say that there are 2 themes that I always see emerge. One is creditor engagement. They've got to understand the process. Where are we in this legal journey? Where have you moved from getting that court order? What are you going to be presenting to me at the creditors meeting in stage 2? So there's engagement. How are you treating my debt? What are your material terms you're going to be presenting to me? So there's heavy engagement. They understand the timeline, the process, what's the journey they're on. So good creditor engagement. The creditor engagement also, I think, applies. Sometimes I see it with the conduct that I've seen in the creditors meeting. And I think it picks up on the same theme that Ravi talked about, this technological shift. Some of the things I've seen blow up is how do you manage complex virtual meetings, possibly with a large group of companies. So you may have 6 different virtual meetings running back to back because there are various subsidiaries all the way up to the holding company. So imagine a large group of companies. So complaints I've seen before, runs into technical problems. They were not allowed to log into the virtual meeting. The virtual meeting closed by time. Their microphone wasn't working. So things like this is where, how do you get around technical problems? Because if it blows up in your stage 2 creditors meeting, angry creditors show up after that. 2, aside from just engagement, would then be transparency. And there is a legal basis to it. Because when issuing a document to explain to the creditors at this stage 2 of the creditors meeting, there is an important document, an explanatory statement. Imagine it almost like a prospectus. It's a thick document explaining to you A to Z, this is how the restructuring, after the negotiations, how some of the in-principle terms is going to be reflected. So there's a legal basis to actually show that there must be full transparency and there must be full disclosure. And again, hopefully it's easy enough to understand for all sorts of creditors. We then finally, hopefully we clear that 75% in stage 2. We're finally now here at the sanction stage, where if we have not made any missteps and I've been through a few cases where there have been such missteps. Hopefully nothing blows up at the sanction stage. But a constant, what I would say, a live legal issue that has been emerging in several of the cases I've been working on, and it's one of the cases where I then lost as well at the sanction stage, is a question of whether when all of the creditors are voting together, and you'll see a mixture of different creditors. You'll see ordinary trade creditors. You will see sometimes certain employees, which they may have unpaid wages. At the same time, if it's a large group of companies, you will sometimes see what I would call related party creditors. They could be fellow subsidiaries. They could be an ultimate holding company. And again, sometimes the lines get blurred. How related is related, but are all of them allowed to all vote together to hit your 75%, or do you need to essentially park them into different rooms, or in legal terms, into different classes? So that's a legal issue that has to actually be gotten, or at least to be strategically determined, I think, very early on, because you hopefully don't have that come up at the sanction stage. But it's a live issue. Jurisdictions like Singapore is debating it. Malaysian cases is coming to the fore. So those are, I would say, common themes, common trends, and things, I guess, that keeps me up at night if I have to go into court the next day to try to argue for sanction or not, or to get the scheme through.
I think perhaps this is something that, again, like I said, we want to keep stuff simple on this show, but I think this is something worth having a chat. One of the things we're trying to avoid is fragmentation. It's hard enough to get 75%, but you're going to put it 75% into multiple classes. That's going to be challenged. I've always advocated maybe we should have followed, a lot of countries follow Chapter 11, and the threshold is no longer 75%, it's 66%. But we have one advantage: we don't have the majority numbers anymore, which makes life a lot easier to get this through. That's one of the things. But again, even in terms of companies, and going back to my days studying law, and who can, even a subsidiary, they are legal. The basis of company law is they're separate entities, and they should have every right to enter and vote. Of course, if they're voting for collateral purposes, then it's also another issue, I suppose, that comes up. But again, a lot of interesting stuff. But Lishi, can you share there's also been a new provision that you talked about, that the court can appoint somebody to actually review if it's fair. I thought this has all been, we've had our advisors, we've had everybody, sit down and think about it for almost 18 months, and have said, okay, we are okay with this. And now the court appoints somebody to review it. Tell me, what's the thinking then, and why is this beginning to take place? I thought men of commerce decide on this, not the courts.
Yeah, thanks, Ravi. And this is unique. I mean, it's again, I don't go into too much of the legal details, but it's unique. It's unique to Malaysia that out of all of the countries, which has this, whether they call it 366, whether they call it a scheme, whether they call it a so-called debtor and possession-driven restructuring, we have a particular provision that we introduced, and it was part of the law reform process. And I think it comes back to what Ravi was hinting at, that, look, men of commerce, how is it that a court, eventually a trained judge, a trained lawyer, or the lawyers arguing, will decide eventually in assessing whether, and again, when we talk about creditor engagement, when we talked about full transparency, ultimately all of that was supposed to lead to what was to be a fair and viable plan that was presented at the creditors meeting. Creditors themselves will have differences in opinion. The thinking is that, yes, the debtor-driven process would have their advisors on board. And of course, the advisors will be saying, look, this is the best plan in the world. But how is it that there's going to be any decision to decide on this conflict? We don't have trained accountants, we don't have trained experts. So the court, with this new provision, and it's been utilized for the first time from what I know of, in the case I'm working on, the court has this ability to say, fine, I'm going to give you permission in your stage one. Look, you're going to go ahead. Because from what I can cursorily read, there's something in place. There's something in place that can go on. But look, even the creditors among themselves are arguing among themselves. How are we going to decide this at stage two, or eventually when you come back to me for stage 3 in the sanction, is this a fair and reasonable proposal? Let me appoint a court-appointed, essentially an accountant or a court-appointed insolvency practitioner. You generate a report. You look at this final plan or proposal that's tabled. You come with an independent view as well to essentially advise the creditors and also, more importantly, advise the court. The professional view is yes. Because at the minimum, many of us and people like Shaun, Ravi, and many of the Simons we work together with, a lot of our base case scenario we want to look at is that, look, if you're not going to vote for this plan, we're looking at an awful winding up of the company. And then there must be a fundamental basis assuming what is the recovery in the liquidation. So at a minimum, this court-appointed insolvency practitioner is able to now also advise, yes, I've looked at the worst case. If we go into an Armageddon, I agree. All of the unsecured creditors, you're only going to get 1 cent. So whatever's on the table is actually a little bit better than already Armageddon, but let's continue to test it in the sense that, look, this is my only opinion, but let the creditors decide, let the men of commerce decide, but it greatly assists, again, a judge sitting and trying to decide, yes, go ahead. At the same time, will I approve or withhold sanction at the end of the legal journey?
Shih, that's an interesting point, because when you talked about this, and I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot on this question.
Okay.
If you're just saying because this advisor is an insolvency practitioner, right? And he's actually, if he's going to calculate a liquidation scenario, fair enough. That's, if he's just limited to that role, I have no objections. But if you're going to start saying on fairness of the whole thing, which includes listed company shares, the CMSA is clear. You must have a license on doing that. So I can't imagine how this gentleman or lady is going to advise the court afoul of the CMSA laws if it's covering a listed company.
Yeah. And I think, Ravi, this is actually a very important issue because moving ahead, there's going to be and I think it's driven by a simple concern. Judges are not going to be trained for increasingly complex restructuring and even insolvency those that slip into contentious insolvency. So the legal trend and where the seed already planted in what we look at now as the Companies Act 2016, and very clearly the seeds have now been planted that there's going to be a big shift in this legal framework because the amendments have been, or at least the proposed amendments have been already tabled publicly. There's going to be this increasing role of this insolvency practitioner, a trained liquidator. And you're right, I think that's the nub of what Ravi is saying, that look, you're a trained liquidator, you're a licensed liquidator, yet you're going to be increasingly playing this court-appointed role to govern so many elements of now important restructuring mechanisms. So I think what the question Ravi is saying is that, look, is the skill set too narrow? I think if I were to a bit more nice. You're trained as a liquidator, but yet your skill set is required for more and more complex restructurings within the capital market scene. And unfortunately, that's a legal framework that is already going. So even right now, yes, I think there's some limitations, but I think we have to be prepared that there's going to be increasing a need for a court-appointed expert, as a liquidated expert. Now he'll be playing an important role to assist creditors, judging, making sure it's fair and for comparisons.
So, we're going to just quickly, today we have a ton of viewers actually watching us live, and a couple of more questions have coming in from the viewers. So if you have any questions for either of our gentlemen, Shaun or Shih, please throw them out into the comment section, whether you're on Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn. We're happy to be able to connect with you guys and try and get that answered. And we're going to come back. We're just going to take a 30-second break. We're going to come back and we're going to go into a little bit more final analysis from both Shaun and Shih. So we'll be right back here on Rethinking Balance Sheets. See you in a bit. Welcome back to Rethinking Balance Sheets. Shaun, maybe we should jump into you. I mean, your quick thoughts on our discussion today, and any key insights that you want to reiterate or highlight.
Yeah, definitely. I think the leadership point is something that we need to keep in mind always. Being able to tell from what's really required, really what's needed, and the bells and whistles, and being able to steer the conversations and the discussions back on track whenever it gets, detracted from all these other noise. So being able to cut through the noise, that's very important. And I think it's interesting how we are trying to adapt now to this whole COVID-19, and we're just kind of like, we're testing it out. It's new grounds, right? We're figuring it out as we go along, as we get better at this. So yeah.
Great. We have a couple questions coming in. Chee has another question for either of you. The type of creditors have become sophisticated beyond the typical unstructured and secured creditors of financial institutions. For in this instance, any comment on the 366 scheme related to aviation sector creditors? You want to take that?
I'll take that because I've actually looked at that in great detail. We were talking a
Mr.
lot
Aviation.
the Singapore lawyer. In fact, the lawyer is my first cousin actually in Singapore. He's an expert in aviation law. It is one of the more tricky ones because the issue is the aircraft is a lease. Yeah, the aircraft is a lease. It's not a typical unsecured. He actually owns the asset in some cases. So there were a lot more things on the aviation sector in the scheme. One of the challenges the aviation sector from the commercial side, from if you are an investment bank on restructuring an aviation sector, your problem is you can't predict the enterprise value. You can't predict the cash flows of the aviation sector because it's, I think, one of a great friend of mine who's gone back to Berkeley and is teaching there, and he wrote an interesting paper when COVID just started. And he mentioned that, imagine this is a football game. We're actually at halftime. Nobody's playing ball as far as the aviation sector. The planes are grounded. They are not moving. They are not flying. So how can one party insist on payments? The providers of capital insist on payments when the game is at halftime. Yeah. And I think that's one of the challenges we're going to see in quite a few of the industries, perhaps even in the construction sector, that it's just impossible to get that projections correct. And I'm actually telling clients, be careful. Don't put up the proposal yet until you've got certainty because, there is, if you go in for a second restructuring, it is going to be very, very tough. And the bankers are not, are going to ask, well, why didn't you tell us this earlier? So I think it's better to be honest upfront and say this is difficult. This is the actual situation on the ground. Hard to make the proposal. Maybe we just hold off in moratoriums for a while until we're at a point the football game starts again and this one. So aviation sector tremendously complex. There are a lot of more issues. We're also seeing it on the shipping sector because I think Shih and ourselves, the way the charges follow the vessel, which is a real challenge. So it's not so straightforward as plant and machinery or buildings, which is normally the security.
And I should also add, I'll just add on legal trends. And we're starting to see this as well. Three big names, right? We have AAX, of course, in the midst of a restructuring in the Malaysian court. We had Malaysian Airlines that then opted to restructure under English laws. If I'm not wrong, Garuda is now either in the midst of some sort of restructuring driven or some tint of insolvency as well. I think Garuda, even through its various restructurings, was again looking for either English law or they're going to different jurisdictions. And I think that is a trend, and I think it hops back to what Ravi was mentioning, that if your main source of creditors and debt are based on lease agreements, and if the main players are lessors from understandably all outside of Malaysia, then there is not an element of foreign shopping, but you're actually going to be trying to look for the legal jurisdiction that gives you the most advantage to restructure, because you have to take care of those elements of those major creditors, which is going to be what's going to be happening to the planes when it's grounded, don't repossess, what do we do? And that's what actually is driving that thought process. Do I restructure in Malaysia? Maybe a Malaysian company. I may be an Indonesian company, but shall we go to England? Right?
I
Shall
think
we
you've
try
seen some Chapter 11 even.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was going to say
Yeah,
that. And they're going
Chapter
to look
11
for Chapter 11 because Chapter 11 has a global reach of sort because it's able to give you global protection of some sort. So you're right. So that's the now even more added complexity, the restructuring. It's not just enough to engage legal counsel and legal advisors.
Great. Shaun, you were saying something just now? Shaun? Okay. I think we may have lost him a little bit.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll come back in.
No problem. Shaun will be back. So, maybe as we wrap up, Lishi, what are your final thoughts, as we wrap up this whole topic and as we, any piece of advice that you have for everybody else?
Yeah, I think it was something that Ravi and I have discussed animatedly before, and even with Shaun. I think the thinking or the more modern thinking of is there really always a need? Okay, I'll rewind back. Maybe I omitted it slightly. As part of that legal journey, like I mentioned, through the 3 stages, you get your court permission. Stage 2, you hold your creditors meeting. You have to eventually return to court and the sanction. That during that period, the conventional thinking is that, oh, I desperately need breathing space. Oh, any creditor could possibly sue me. Any creditor could possibly wind me up. So the law allows you to get a court-driven moratorium. It's called a restraining order. But again, a restraining order is not in all jurisdictions. So again, if you look at global trends, it's not been in England since the very start that they introduced a scheme arrangement. Why is that? So then the next thing is, why is that? Well, because if you're engaging in a proper, transparent, fully engaged restructuring, the creditors will then recognize that this is really a viable restructuring. We can't run away from the liquidation numbers. I've seen the offer on the table. Yes, you need a bit more time. So I guess the other thinking or the other option is that, do you really need to go for a court order to get the moratorium? Right? Are there other means of getting a more consensual buy-in so that there is, but critically, you just need that breathing space.
Maybe I just can comment on that. And I think the trend that we've also started a lot more is in terms of restraining orders, we've tried to avoid it because it's a long process. You've got to be completely transparent. A lot of creditors get upset. They seem like it's a challenge for them, especially bank creditors and so forth. So I think it's working with good lawyers. If you've already gone to court and you've got a meeting date, an order for a meeting date, we can stave off most of the smaller creditors. And the judges hopefully will say, why don't you just wait for this meeting and hear us out? But in the event that we do need a restraining order, then when there's a real threat and the banks also see the threat as going to be destructive to their needs, then they're also supportive of the restraining order, and you can get that 50% to crossover for that independent director. That's probably the hardest threshold for the RO, the restraining order, and that can be done. So yeah, I think that's really useful, Lishi, on sharing the current practice, which is trying to avoid an RO but going to court to get the order first, and then and presenting that to court, and then telling creditors, well, why do you need to wind up? Just wait 5-6 months. We'll have a meeting and we can all decide.
Absolutely. And Shaun, just now you were saying a couple of
Yeah.
things. I think you were cut off a little bit. You want to close up and wrap us up with your final thoughts and your final sharing?
Sure. Yeah. I think as we approach the last phase, again, there's the lethargy and fatigue that sets in for all parties. I think it's just helpful to remind ourselves during this phase is that we're all human and we're all trying to do our best to do a good job. So being able to have that open relationship with the lawyers and the creditors, and just results in good friendships after the project. So it's important to focus on the relationships, and that just helps things work. Just like everything else, relationships go a long way in getting things done. So yeah.
Oh,
And that's
fantastic.
something, and Roshan, we put a lot of value to, is relationships with people we can work with. It makes life a lot easier at this, no pun intended about the ego thing earlier, but that's important. And it's just not just relationship at the partner level in a firm, it's between the managers, the associates, all that is
Yep.
clicking away nicely. Helps. But just a couple of final thoughts, Roshan, on this thing. We didn't cover the investment banking part of it, and a lot of the large schemes. The execution also means a corporate exercise. But much of what we talked about, the legal documentation, getting things right, doing the due diligence correctly, putting the documents right, and working with the regulators, all hold true here. And then the only other part I would have thought is maybe Lishi could just quickly jump in is sometimes there's also dealing with government authorities, charges, stamp duty, etc. Again, that's something which is important, or even vessel charges, transfer titles, all that has to be done. So again, there are people who are good at this. Yeah. There are people who are their actual documentation or solicitors who are actually good at it. Again, part of that big story we started in the first episode about getting your team right. This is, as your quarterback or your midfielder or somewhere there out there. He's got to play the role. No point having all the strikers, and if you don't have these critical players there to make sure that we get to the end line, is equally good. So that part of the execution phase, you need very good documentation lawyers with good connections or knows how to work through the government authorities well, is also a critical part.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. We've got a couple of folks, Dato' Ramesh. Hopefully, you did not lose too much of Shaun and us. But it's been another fantastic show. Thank you so much for being with us. We will be back next Friday, as always. Going a little bit technical, but that's okay. We're having fun together here in Rethinking Balance Sheets. Shaun, Lishi, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you being with us.
Thanks, Roshan.
Appreciate your great input. Ravi, as always, thanks for a great show. We will see you next time, same place, same time, right? Here on Rethinking Balance Sheets. Goodbye, everyone, and have a fantastic weekend. Yes, it is the weekend, Friday. See you guys, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.